What's the most satisfying act of revenge that you've ever experienced? Here's one time, when I was about 15 to 16, I was about to walk inside my building, had just placed the keys in the lock, when, reflected in the door, I see two girls walking by behind me. I can actually hear one of them say, as she points at me, "Let's talk to this guy." But then her friend goes, "No, not him, he's ugly. Let's go." The girl that actually wanted to talk to me was cute and everything, man. So, not only did her friend cock block me, so to speak, but she also called me ugly. And that hurt. I walk upstairs, walk into my place, and then walk over to the balcony to see if I can spot the girls. They're right across the street, talking to each other, and the cock blocker is being a bit loud and obnoxious. That did it for me. I walk back into the kitchen, grab a slice of ham and swoosh, threw it at the girl. Direct hit. She had a total what the freck look on her face which made me smile. Of course, in retrospect, that was a stupid thing to do, and I wouldn't do it again. Too long, didn't read. Ham her time. Edit, my English are not good. I couldn't stand this one kid who I went to high school with, who lived a few blocks away in the neighborhood. One night, he sent cops to my parents' house where I was still living, telling them I had done something I didn't do. Luckily I had a receipt in my pocket from the restaurant I was at, in suburb 10 miles away that was time-stamped half an hour later than when he said the incident occurred. Regardless, my parents were woken up, etc. etc. I was pissed. Well, a few days later, my mom bought some plants that she left in the kitchen window. Our family cat was a nutball to begin with, but all of a sudden he was constantly jumping on the counters, eating these plants. When I'd try and shoo him down, he would actually take a defensive stance and hiss and scratch. 10 minutes later, he would be back, chewing on the leaves. I asked my mom what the plants were, and she said, "Oh, they are catnip. They have a really pretty flower. I'm going to plant them in the backyard when the weather warms up." I was like, "Not a chance you're planting these in our backyard. Look what you're doing to the cat. He's an aggressive stoner. You'll bring every cat in the neighborhood, and they will all fight, all night long." Suddenly, at that exact moment, a revenge plot was born. The following night, I snuck into his backyard and planted the catnip everywhere. My friend who lived across the street from him told me it worked perfectly, and that he was always complaining about cats fighting in his backyard after that. Revenge. No physical confrontation, no property damage, just stoned cats. Felt a little like some sort of supervillain, sending out my cat minions to do my dirty work. When I was in junior high I used to hang out with these dudes during PE class. Then, they turned into douchebags. They started bullying other kids, not participating in any of the activities, etc. I started getting in trouble just by hanging out with them, so I stopped. Of course, I was now a bussy. They would do things like try to push me while running track, gang up on me in sports, etc. Well, one day I opened my lunch to find my dessert missing. This went on for days, and I had no idea where it was going. I then saw one of the dudes eating it while laughing at the lunch table and shooting me knowing glances. I could have easily beat this fracker down, but I was never into physical violence. So I thought, and I thought, and I schemed, and it hit me. The next week, I brought homemade brownies. Mondays were fine. Tuesdays were fine. Wednesdays were fine. Thursdays had a little surprise in them in the form of chocolate laxatives. While he was eating the brownie during lunch I approached him. I told him I knew he was stealing my desserts and he should stop. "What are you going to do about it?" was his reply to the laughs of his little cronies. I turned around and walked away. We found ourselves in PE class a bit later that afternoon. It was time for calisthenics. Jumping jacks, sit-ups, stretching, and oh my god, what the hell was the scream from a girl a few rows over from me. This kid cheated so much his entire gym shorts were soaked with brown liquid. It was going down his legs. It was filling his shoes. He tried to run out of the gym, but slipped in the sheet water and got it all over his body and some on his face. For 2 weeks he didn't come to school. While he was gone, the rumors started. Some said he died. Some said he was sheeting blood. None of those were true. He was so freaking embarrassed, and he knew what he was coming back to. This happened in 7th grade. We parted ways after junior high when I went to private high school. However, I heard that the sheet incident followed him through high school. No one would hang out with him. He was a social pariah. Now, keep in mind I had no idea it would turn out like that. I figured he would get stomach cramps and diarrhea that night. I had no idea he would end up taking a sheet bath in the middle of gym in front of everyone. But I didn't regret it, and still don't. He was a piece of shit that deserved what he got. Not really sure if he suspected me or not. If he did, he never let on. My Xbox Live account was stolen from me by some random person I didn't know. Not really sure how he did it. Maybe got lucky and guessed my password or something. But anyways, I woke up, tried signing on, and it wasn't working. Tried recovering it, said my password was wrong. Went on my second account and said stolen account was off my friends list. Seemed as if my account had vanished into thin air. At the time I was pretty big into COD, World at War, and I was in the top 1000 players for search and destroy. So I went into the leaderboards and eventually found my account with a different gamer tag and the friends deleted. So I called Xbox support and began a very long process to get my account back. Finally, a few weeks later, they got my email and password to the account and sent them to me, as I was the rightful owner to the account and had my parents' credit card on the account to prove it. So they sent me this kid's email and password he had put on my account. I went on Facebook and signed in using those credentials, and by God it logged me into the Frikers Facebook profile. I proceeded to like hundreds of homosexual pride pages. No offense to gay people. I was 15 at the time and this was the most insulting thing I could think of. And pages dedicated to bestiality and any other weird messed up thing I found. Then I posted a bunch of weird tranny porn and midget porn and everything my wild teen mind could find. Topped it all off by sending messages to at least 30 girls on his friends list, saying all sorts of fricked up weird stuff, ranging from "I'm gay and need somebody to talk to about it" to "I sucked a dog's dick once and liked it." Then changed his email and password to make it extra hard to get on and delete the stuff. Checked his page for a while after that, and he had deleted his Facebook within 2 hours. But I like to think that I fricked his day up, and that makes me happy, even though it was about 3 weeks after he had taken my account. Totally worth it. Too long. Didn't read. Xbox account gets stolen. Figure out the thief's Facebook email and password. Post nasty disgusting things for an hour as revenge. Edit. Okay, it wasn't as simple as sending me the email and password. They sent me the email, and I had to go through the process of resetting the email's password. Once I did that, I had access to my account. After that, I went to Facebook and tried signing in with that email, and then went through the process of resetting a Facebook password. So basically I just reset it, then logged in with my new password. Sorry, I guess that's sort of important information, but I had just gotten to work when I posted it, and it was like 5 years ago, so I sort of forgot some details. 4 years and years in late elementary school and most of middle school, this one kid would just bully me constantly. Towards the end of 8th grade it had gotten pretty bad, and I really just wanted it to end. Let's call him Chris. When looking for a lost parrot on my property, I found the bottom half of some animal. May have been a muskrat, groundhog, or something similar, but I couldn't be sure exactly what, under a tree, and brought it back to the house. I then called my mom, who was out of town traveling at the time, how I'd go about making it stop stinking. This was before I could really just Google it. She wouldn't really help me, because I wouldn't tell her why I wanted to disinfect a dead rodent, but I let it sit out in the sun. This was late May, for a few days, and that killed most of the bugs and whatnot. I then wrapped it up in butcher paper and put it in a paper bag. I then wrote, "Dear Chris, you forgot your lunch this morning. Love, Mom" on it. Chris always brought a bagged lunch in to school every single day. In the morning after the first class period started, I went to his locker, no one locked his, and put it in his locker. After first period you could hear the screech from the floor below. Along with everyone else, I ran towards the sound and saw Chris walking down the hallway sobbing. I didn't do much to hide the fact that I did it and was given a day of in-school suspension. The principal didn't find the humor in negotiating for a half day since it was only half a rodent. Chris never really messed with me after that. My girlfriend, at the time, had a boss who was always hitting on her. He would buy her things, flirt with her, etc. We hit a rough patch in our relationship, and he did everything in his power to win her from me. He was a VP at the company, so he had the money and probably the smooth talking skills. She would bring him up in fights as a comparison. I got sick of it. Me and her ended our 3-year relationship, and sure enough, they are dating about a month later. However, he knew that the company was making her work overtime and not paying her, and said there's nothing I could do about it when she asked him, and he knew that she was having to take work home, which was a no-no, since she was a lingerie designer and was helping her start her own line, which was a conflict of interest to his company. Flashback to a few months earlier. Her company has a Christmas party, and I meet the CEO. I won't say his name, but it was a name that I remembered for some reason. Now, I was pissed. This scumbag basically took my girlfriend from me. I know it was probably for the best, because any girl that would fall for that shouldn't be with me anyway. But I'm not thinking that way at the time. I have no ethical hang-ups about revenge, and it was time to get some. I realized that her company email address had a template. First name, last name, @company.com. So I figured that the CEO's email address probably had the same format. With all the knowledge I had, it would be a shame not to blindly email the CEO of his company with detailed information about how his VP was putting his company at risk by dating his employees, knowingly breaking employment laws, allowing sensitive materials out into the public, and start a rival company. So that's what I did. I never got a response from the CEO. However, a couple years later I ran into my ex and had a couple of drinks with her. She told me about how shitty of a boyfriend he was, how they fought all the time, and how she went off and hit him one night. She got really close to hitting me a couple of times, but I calmly told her that if she laid a hand on me, I would hit her back harder than she could ever imagine, and would be happy to go to jail for it. She also told me that the problems really started when he lost his job. I asked how that happened, and she told me that it was abrupt, but even he didn't really know the reason. It was one of those HR-driven "we are letting you go" type firings. I told her what I did. She was shocked and angry and left the bar without saying another word, but I didn't give a shit. Even the remote possibility that I was the reason why that scumbag got fired and he got my shitty girlfriend who hit him made me feel like $1,000,000. And I would do it again in a heartbeat. Edit, spelling. I was at the park with my girlfriend. It was a hot day, so we decided to eat ice cream at a bench. So once we were done we were holding hands and talking. Out of nowhere this older couple in their mid-20s with their daughter who looked like she was at least 5 years old. They then proceeded to shout and yell at us for acting indecently in front of their daughter and shaming us for holding hands in the park. Mind you, they were cussing and yelling in front of their daughter. We tell them we're doing nothing wrong and they should be ashamed for using that kind of language in front of their daughter. Eventually the mom gets into my girlfriend's face and says she will frick her up and called her bitch. I was about to take matters into my own hands, but my girlfriend said no, let's just leave, so I did. As we were walking away they screamed at us and said that they were going to call the cops. We said okay. We saw an elderly couple and they asked if everything's okay. We told them what happened and they said they knew. They saw the whole thing happened. Turns out the elderly gentleman was an ex-cop and knew people who were on the force, so he said to just stay and sit with them and they will explain to the police. So we're sitting waiting for the police and the couple with the daughter are standing by us recording us. Finally the police show up and immediately one of the officers sees the elderly man and they know each other and greet each other. They talk to the other couple first and then me and my girlfriend. He asked if we were doing anything inappropriately at the park and we said no. Then off to the side we, including the officer, heard the mother start cussing at the elderly lady, telling her to mind her own business. The officer gives us one look and says sorry for wasting your time, you're free to go. Edit. Okay, to clear things up, no, I'm not a lesbian, I'm a male, and this older couple were in their late 20s, like 26 or 27. Me and my girlfriend are barely going to be 20. Too long. Didn't read. Crazy couple call cops on me and girlfriend. Backfires and they get in trouble. I work retail. This woman comes in to return a cell phone. She says she's been to the news. They did a show on her, and she was told by head office that she can come in for a complete refund. She is months past our 14-day return period. I'll let her know I'm sorry, but because we are a franchise location, we provide cannot warranty support. The return period is 14 days. The closest warranty is on this card I'm handing you. She freaks the frick out, calling me every 4-letter word she can think of. I tell her I'm sorry, and I move on to the next customer. She is honking and flapping at the customers in my store, going on about how her kid is in the hospital with cancer, etc. She finally leaves. 10 minutes later her daughter comes in. I repeat the 14-day/warranty center speech. She calls me a frickwit and leaves. Fast forward a month, my boss calls me and says a woman will be in this afternoon by the name of XXXXXXX. Return it and give her full refund. I say okay. 4 days later she comes in and throws the phone on the counter with the receipt and says nothing at all. I do the refund and I make the call to customer care to cancel the line. Welp. She decided it was time to leave because she has her money and I'm an inferior sack of skin wasting her time. Customer care finally picks up and asks to verify the account and ask the customer a few questions. Because the customer has left and cannot verify the account, the phone line cannot be cancelled. I say thank you and hang up. She's gonna receive a letter in a couple months from collections because we cannot contact her anymore. Edit. A word. Freshman year. Fresh out of middle school, aka the worst years of my entire freaking life. I had always been sort of easy to anger, which naturally made me a prime bullying target. But I slowly started to mellow out once high school came along. But this was freshman year, so I was still in a sort of transfer state, if you will. Anyone who's been to high school knows that freshmen still have the mindset of middle schoolers, some more so than others. Science class. One of those teachers that clearly is not into what he is doing. I sat at the front of the class with my friends and we would always spend all class just passing notes to one another. The table nearby featured a bunch of kids who entertained themselves by throwing things at us. Small things, like paperclips, bits of erasers, even little balls of silly putty, if I remember right. Being good little boys and girls, my friends and I let the teacher know, and the teacher reprimands the kids. But this is high school, and you know that the jack sheet. They kept throwing things at us. This continued for about a week, maybe 2. Can't remember. We tell the teacher again. Teacher scolds the kids. Goes back to teaching. They still throw things. Now for the most part, when I was bullied, I was told to just ignore it, and for the most part one did. But something about that day, something clicked in my head, and finally I thought to myself, wait a minute, I don't have to put up with this sheet. Fun fact, in the middle of every table in the class was a stack of textbooks that for the most part went unused. I knew what I had to do. The next projectile that hit our table was met with swift and heavy retaliation in the form of a hardbound missile sent careening at the attacker's face. Unfortunately I was never good at sports and I missed. The book suffered no injuries. Much to my relief, I would have had to pay for a new one, I'm certain. There were no casualties that day, but the message had been made clear. Do not frick with me anymore. I shook the hand of one of my peers from across the room after class and went about my merry way. I did not get in a lick of trouble for it, and starting from that moment they never threw things at us again. Too long. Didn't read. I chucked a textbook at a bully, and he stopped bullying me, and I didn't get in trouble for it. Growing up, from ages 11 to about 16, I was banned from any kind of leisure reading, activities etc. My life was literally textbooks and the Bible, and a lot of empty time confined to a room I wasn't allowed to leave for anything, including bathroom breaks or food, without permission. All phone conversations were held on speakerphone with an adult present, and I was typically told around 5 to 8 times a day a verbal list of all the ways I'd fricked up that day/week/whatever. All because my stepmother married my father knowing he had me, and knowing she didn't want to help raise me. So she made my life hell, because the fact that I even existed was pretty much the bane of her existence. The reason I moved in with my father at 11 years old, a month before her and Milligram's dad started dating, is because I was having a lot of abuse issues from my mom and her boyfriends. To make coming into that crap even worse, one of her bartering tools was she had raised 3 sons and knew what she was doing anytime my dad tried to interject. She liked to say how much better they all are than me and how good they listened, how none of them had problems. 2 of her sons are on assistance and have never gone to college. One of them actually had to move in with us because he was on the run from the law and the drug cartel in his home state for reasons I won't elaborate on. To this day, car notes, home leases, phone bills etc. have to be put in his mom's or his girlfriend's name, and has to use the odd jobs board in his local town to make any money, since jobs mean background checks and being in the system. The oldest is doing really well for himself and was recently married. I work full time, make more than she does. I've had 3 years of living as an adult. She's had 20 plus, worked at jobs that I love, and I'm relatively emotionally and mentally stable with no assistance through prescriptions, while she continues to pop pill after pill, complaint after complaint, and still talks about all the ways in which I'm ruining her marriage. Some 7 years after I moved out, she's in a hole and is miserable, and I'm completely happy with my life and the path I'm on. Frick you, Tammy. Got my degree and wasn't able to get a promotion at my current company. Let my boss know I was looking for a new job and handled the move professionally. Left on good terms. Started my new job at a significant bump in pay and quickly discovered it was nothing like the DBA job I had interviewed for. Instead of managing databases, I was expected to learn a proprietary coding language created by my new boss. There was no documentation and he treated everyone like an idiot if they asked questions while trying to learn. After 3 months I had a review. I was told I was doing great and given a raise. I continued learning and persevering through my boss's abuse. 3 months later I was pulled into another meeting with my boss and his boss. I was told I wasn't meeting expectations, although they wouldn't explain how, and told to sign a document putting me into a lesser position at a significant cut in pay. If I didn't sign, I was told I would be fired. I signed and immediately started looking for another job. I called up my old boss and asked for a reference. She told me she would do so happily, but I should know she had just submitted a job requisition for a new position that I would be perfect for. We discussed it, and I agreed it would be a fit. I went through the interview process and got the job at a higher salary than my new company had started me at. The only problem was that they couldn't bring me on until January 1st. It was Oct. I said that was fine. For the next 3 months I made sure to use all my vacation and did next to nothing while at work. I scheduled vacation for the last week of the year. On the last business day of the year I came into the office, handed in my laptop and a letter of resignation that was effective immediately. They were actually surprised that I was quitting. Not extremely proud of this one looking back, but you frick do I not regret doing it. Driver's education at my school over the summer lasts about a month. There's a kid I'm partnered with. We had 3 to a group with our French teacher as the instructor, who is a complete douchebag. He's pretty loaded money wise, always condescending to people, tries to pull the tough guy act when he clearly doesn't look like one. We'll call him Chris. Mind you, Chris doesn't have many friends for the reasons I've listed. He also drives to driver's education. Remember that. So, one day, we are working on parking. I couldn't park for the life of me for some reason. I was clearly angry at this after seeing how well the 2 people I was paired with were doing. The session we were doing ends, and Chris looks at me as we walk far enough to get to his new Sonata his parents had bought him. He'd only had it for about a week and a half by this time. So, Joe Julian, you see this? This is how you park, not like a retard. I'm normally a calm person, but he was really good at getting under my skin. I picked up a rock about the size of a baseball and looked him square in the eyes. Threw it right through his windshield. He obviously started freaking out. Chris talks about how he's going to call the police. I bring up the obvious fact that he's 20 miles from his house and he's driven here himself. He's already broken the law by driving without a license. He drove home after some shit talk between the 2 of us. Could he have actually called the cops on me still? Absolutely. I'm still entirely confused as to how I didn't get in trouble with it. It wasn't really proper justice, sure, but it still felt just as sweet. I'm not normally douchy like this. I promise I just feel very cool telling this story, so please don't hurt me. When I was in the 7th grade, my best friend was this overweight girl who always got teased by the popular kids. We went on a camping trip as a class and my friend and I were assigned to the same room in a cabin as 2 of the popular girls. My friend and I were bunked together, and the other 2 girls were bunked together. One day after doing some fun camping activities like mountain rappelling, we returned to the room and my friend saw that her bottle of shampoo had been squeezed all over the pillow and blanket on her bunk bed. She was in tears. She was seriously crying uncontrollably and couldn't fathom who would do such a thing. We spent the rest of the day laundering her bedding, while everyone else was finishing up with more camping activities. That night after she had fallen asleep, I pretended to be asleep too, and I overheard the 2 popular girls whispering about the prank they'd pulled. They were quite pleased with themselves. One of them felt mildly bad about it, but they both still thought it was a great success. Then they changed the subject and started talking about a bunch of other stupid shit. After a while, they started getting tired, and their conversation slowed down. When it had been quiet for a while, I scratched my fingernail repeatedly and quickly against the wall, then stopped abruptly. I don't remember what the wall was made of, but it made a very unique sound, and it wasn't clear where it was coming from. "Did you hear that?" one of the girls asked, suddenly wide awake. The other did hear it. "What was it?" "I don't know." After they calmed down a bit, I did it again. This went on and on for a good hour at least, possibly more. I only scratched the wall briefly every time, but at the same exact pace, and then silently listened as they freaked the hell out. They pondered every possibility: a raccoon on the roof, a ghost, a murderer trying to get in. They told themselves it had to be a raccoon. That's what they kept falling back on. They even got out of the bed to check the window for a raccoon, but saw nothing there. Then when they were all cozy in their beds again, I did it again. They left the cabin to check the roof for a raccoon. Nothing. Sometimes, I chose not to make the noise for a long period of time, to let them think it had stopped. Then, I'd do it again. It was so awesome. They were tired, but terrified and couldn't sleep. They thought I was sleeping the whole time. My friend was asleep. She was snoring loudly, something they had been laughing about. They weren't laughing anymore. I did this until I myself was too tired to go on. Then, I fell asleep with them still wide-eyed and frightened. It was very satisfying to get them back for what they'd done to my friend, making her cry on this trip she'd looked forward to for so long. The next day, I did tell her I overheard them saying that they were the ones who had shampooed her bed, but I don't think I told her that she was avenged. I didn't think it was necessary. I overheard the girls talking to each other the next day about how freaky last night had been, and I continued doing my camping thing, ignoring them completely. I don't really believe in revenge, and have guilt over most vengeful acts I have done, but that one still brings a smile to my face. I should find those girls on Facebook and admit that it was me. Was going to upvote, but I'm going to leave it at 666. It wasn't really revenge, but more like that karma that people believe in. When I was 14, I met this guy online. Sounds bad, but he was actually 16. We hung out a few times and I really liked him. Regardless, we never actually dated, but he led me on. He took my virginity, only to tell me the next day that he thought of me more as a sister. Gross, right? I was furious and went off on him. In the following few months, I found out that I wasn't his first virgin. Apparently, he did this to a lot of girls. But he had this way about him that, even when he pissed you off, you couldn't cut him off. I still wanted to be with him. So did all these other girls. Years later, I had eventually moved on. My mom and I were headed downtown with the radio on when they made a few local news story announcements. His name was mentioned. I hadn't been listening until I heard his name. When I got home, I looked it up. Turns out he met another girl online. He was 18 at this point. He met a 13-year-old girl who claimed to be 16. He talked her into sneaking out to meet him. He did this all the time with me. I never actually did it, though. At the firehouse where he volunteered, they had sex, and she went home. Her parents caught her sneaking in and made her tell them everything. He went to jail for a year, was put on probation, registered with Megan's Law, and gained a shit ton of weight. Justice served for that girl and the rest of us that he fricked around with slash on. I hope this isn't too long. Here we go. I grew up with an abusive father, emotionally abusive mother, and got bullied every day at school. I ended up switching schools in 10th grade and minded my own business. I ended up making good friends with this super nerd like myself, but he was a pretty big jock too. I was getting straight A's, but at the ISD school that I did for the second half of the day for computer tech, I'd finish my work in the first hour and leave. It's not that I didn't care, I just knew most of what was being taught. I wasn't being challenged. Due to all of my missing days, they threatened to expel me if I missed another day, which I really feared due to my alcoholic abusive father that was waiting at home. It was October of my senior year. I was carpooling with my one friend and we stopped at Mart. Although I was in CNT classes, he was in early education and really wanted to buy a costume. He got this silly inflatable horse/cowboy outfit for his class, but he really felt that the white shirt I was wearing would have been better for his costume, which it would have been. Now mind you, after having two abusive parents and a sister that constantly treated me like shit and tried to poison me on several occasions, my self-confidence was falling through the cracks of the floor. I really didn't want to take off my shirt for him to see my weird shape. I was skin and bones, but I also have quite the nerd gut going on, and I was really embarrassed. I refused to take off my shirt over and over, politely. He got into his car with my cigs, keys, wallet, and phone all in it. He locked the doors, started the engine, and looked at me with this shit-eating grin. At this point the only thing going through my head was my dad beating the hell out of me when I got home, because I failed him, yet again. I jumped on the roof to stop him. He drove away and slammed on the brakes. I broke my right mastoid, bone behind your ear, feel for it, got Bell's palsy 7th cranial nerve damage, bruised my frontal lobe, personality, and had a subarachnoid bleed, deep internal bleeding of the brain. I was out of school for 3 months. I was really hoping everything could go back to normal, and I took those nervous first steps back into the school. The school where I just blended in, didn't get picked on, and thought I had a good friend. When I returned to school I found out that the school paper was writing about how I was doing drugs, drinking and car surfing. I did none of those things at all, not even once. The local city newspaper was also printing the same about me, things that weren't true in any sense. I confronted the CEO of the newspaper and the newspaper from the school. Both said we try to print the most accurate information. I was hoping the worst was over, but after that I went to the career center, and Jeff, whom I thought I was somewhat friends with, would sing Cruise in USA every single day. The Business Professionals of America competition was coming up, and Jeff had built an elaborate website for the occasion. I was filled with absolute rage. Everything I escaped from, it was back. I spent the 4-hour class coding a virus that would restart his computer every time he booted, erase the specific folder where his BPA project was. The teacher had us all use a particular location on our computers, and a few other things. I unleashed my creation on his computer 2 days before BPA, and in my glory I held my head high. The professor came to me and asked if it was me. I responded calmly, "Why, yes. I did put a virus on his computer that I coded." The professor looked at me kind of cool-keyed and said, "Could you please remove it? I can't figure out how to remove it." I said, "Why sure, Mr. XXXXXXX." I removed it. He thanked me and Jeff's project. Perhaps a scholarship was gone. Today I feel guilty and realize it was somewhat misdirected anger. I feel bad, I really do. But there's nothing more gratifying than standing up for yourself and learning that you're worth more than what's being dealt to you. I did get the friend back that almost killed me too, but that's another story. Sorry if there is any typos. I just worked a double and I'm a little sleepy. No proofread. XD, I hope you enjoyed my story. There was this older kid who was just a big jackass. He bullied everybody and generally made sure everyone knew who he was the boss. This one day I was the target of some remark about me having glasses and being a nerd. I reacted poorly and became an easy target for a while. Thing was, he was also successful in sports, having been picked out to play in my city's junior, European, football team, soccer, and liked to boast about it. He kind of had celebrity status at our school because of this. Autumn comes around, and the school announces a football tournament between all classes where each class picked out a team and played each other throughout the semester. The whole thing was pretty well organized and a huge success. I never played football in a team and don't really like sports per se, but from time to time I played during lunch breaks and had become known as a reliable goalie, so of course I get picked out in my class's team. We make it to semi-finals and the game ends tied, so we do penalty kicks to decide the winner. So fate put this bully in front of me. The crowd, other classes and parents, was all expecting him to score as he was the celebrity football player, and I was the nerdy kid who occasionally play goalie on lunch breaks. It was not a deciding shot, yet, but to me it was personal. This jackass with all success and way too big ego needed to be taken down a notch. I just had to beat him at something he was good at. He aims for upper right corner, confident that I'd never be able to save it. He puts all his strength into it, but no, you guessed it, I saved. It hurt like hell to catch that ball, but it was so sweet. The part of the crowd that was rooting for my team went nuts. Side note, probably as close to fame I'll ever be too. He got so angry that he went into the locker rooms and punched through a window and cut up his whole arm. A lot of blood, needed stitches but not life threatening. He didn't pick on anyone after that. I didn't experience it personally, but it was at my behest, and it was satisfying as hell. I worked for a very small company, about 20 employees, right out of college. When the owners of the company went out of town, about 2 or 3 times a year, the managers would frequently throw all-day parties for the workers. We'd grill, drink, play games, etc. There was one older lady at the company that, I guess, for whatever reason, did not like me. I could be a bit outspoken about social issues being in my early 20s, so that may have been it, but I really to this day don't know why she disliked me so much. Anyway, she waited until about a week after one of these parties, went straight to the owners of the company, and told them that the week before, she was watching me and noticed I didn't do any work all day. None of us had, including her. She was banking on the fact that the owner would only pull my logs for that day and no one else's, and she was right. My managers fought for me. Truthfully, they were probably a bit worried I'd rat them and the whole office out, but it was to no avail. I got fired. The revenge bit of the story is that, since it was such a small company, everyone quickly got wind of what this woman did, and she was given stone cold silent treatment by everyone, including the managers. She even went to the owner and complained that she was being treated unfairly, but there wasn't really a lot he could do about people not wanting to socialize with her. She ended up quitting about 3 weeks after I got fired. Apparently she had trouble finding a job and came back a few months later begging for her job back, but my managers were in charge of all hiring and basically laughed in her face. She went above them again to the owner, but at that point he was sick of her drama and told her he wasn't interested in having her back. Too long, didn't read. Former co-worker gets me fired behind a bunch of bullshit, ends up quitting because I was well liked at the office and she couldn't handle the backlash from the managers and my co-workers. Not me but my father. He was working for an IT company developing software, but ended up being asked to help out in sales for a few weeks as their department was short-staffed for some reason. He turned up and found that his new colleagues really didn't like him, for no apparent reason, though he suspected it might be racism. Within the first few days, he'd scored a few sales and his manager had actually offered him a job in sales, but he turned it down as he preferred having a set salary rather than commission. The reason for his relative success was down to 2 factors. Networking, several subscriptions to professional journals and magazines. He had started by calling people he knew, and then he started calling people he'd read about in magazines, while the rest of the department were apparently relying on cold calling. Furthermore, having helped write the software he was selling, he could actually explain what it did, while the rest of the department, well, they couldn't. At the beginning of his second week in the department, he took a long lunch break as he had to visit a dentist, and got back to find a woman was being congratulated on her success making a big sale to a company he had planned on calling that very day. When he got to his desk, He noticed things weren't as he'd left them, and noticed a list of people and phone numbers he'd planned on calling had vanished. It doesn't take a genius to figure out what had happened while he was away. Rather than let it slide, he decided to get his revenge. The next day, he made up an excuse to be out of the office in the late morning and early afternoon, spending his time back in the software department. When he returned this time, however, things were a lot more sour. As before, he had left a list of potential customers on his desk, and, as before, the woman had taken it off his desk while he was away and started making calls. The problem is that one of the phone numbers wasn't for a company, but for the wife of her boss, who her boss was currently in the process of divorcing. And the name he had listed next to the number was the mistress of said boss, the reason they were getting divorced. The boss wasn't happy at all to get a phone call from his soon-to-be ex-wife's lawyer, accusing him of getting his staff to harass her. She got fired, didn't get any commission for the big sale she'd made the previous day, and my dad ended up finalizing that sale in the end, as he explained that, by sheer coincidence, he had gone to university with the guy the woman was dealing with. A few weeks later, she accused my dad of plotting and setting up the whole thing, but, by this time, he was back in his old position and the guy in charge of the sales department had no power over him. This happened more years ago than I care to count, but it still pleases me. I went to a boarding school. There was another kid there who was horribly competitive and smug, especially, it seemed, towards me. He was always telling me how he was better than me, how he always got better grades than me, how he was going to get into a better university than me, and would then go on about how crap I was, and how academically inferior I was to him, and how I would never really amount to anything. For some reason I just took it, and didn't really react until one night, when I saw an opportunity. He was a member of a club created for the school's high-achieving pupils. Needless to say, I wasn't. This club met in a classroom one evening each week. I bumped into him on his way to one of these meets, and, to wind him up, told him I thought I'd go along too. He just sneered at me, telling me it wasn't appropriate for me to be there. I told him that not only was I going along, but I was faster than him, and I'd race him there. He couldn't resist the competition, so we agreed that I'd take the outside route. It was raining, and he'd go via the inside route, which involved cutting across an assembly hall. We set off as fast as we could, him sprinting towards the hall and me going the outside route. Then it struck me, there was a classical music concert going on in the assembly hall that he was approaching at high speed. Now, I should have shouted to him to warn him, but instead I could only stop and watch and laugh as he exploded through a double swing door right in the middle of a quiet violin solo that had to stop as the performer was so shocked by his sudden entry that had made over 400 parents and pupils gasp and stare at him. He then got hauled up in front of the teacher, who was in charge of the concert, and, being a grass, he brought me in too. When he explained we were on our way to his elitist, stuck-up club meet, and I'd suggested a race I'd an idle knowledge, and asked what would I want to go to one of those meetings for. It's hardly appropriate for me, as if the teacher totally believed me and this other kid got punished. I don't think he ever forgave me. Too long, didn't read. Made a smug twast run full speed into an assembly hall, bringing a classical concert to an immediate halt in front of 400 shocked people. I inherited low six-figure amount of money from my father, helped a girl I knew for years because she was getting evicted by her own mother. Over the months her and her boyfriend became addicted to heroin and attempted to extort me for money. I told them I was moving cross country. I did the week. Before they left they set me up for an armed robbery. I was throwing my garbage out and someone kicked my door open. A guy kicked my door down with a shotgun and screamed, "What's in the bag? What is in the bag, nigga?" I said, "It's just garbage." He said, "I don't care." I said, "Why?" Nearly in tears. Not part of the revenge story, just thought it was funny. I was relieved of most my valuables and close to 10k. The couple themselves, from being sneaky and sin fraud and taking advantage of my good nature, took me for 40k to 70k in cash, back rent, back bills, and assorted other, including paying for her kid's birthday because she was a broke junkie. After all was said and done, I just called the cops. Cops connected them with several other crimes throughout the area. Both of them and the robber are facing from 7 to 55 years in jail, and she is never allowed to see her son again. Also I get a percentage of their money until probably forever, because I can't see them getting jobs that matter or pay well after being felons. Wish I could just get my money back in a lump sum, but them being caged for a majority of their lives and denied access to their kids is fine too. I'm at the front of the line. It's my turn. I do my thing. The door is still banging. The toilet is foul and that used for hours by hundreds of people way. I'm happy to get out. The door is still banging. I walk off into the sunset, past dozens of people who are giggling about the angry porta potty that rattles in the distance. Too long. Didn't read some guy skips a 1/2 hour wait for a bathroom, gets trapped and must wait for rescue from the people he cut in front of. I inherited low 6-figure amount of money from my father, helped a girl I knew for years because she was getting evicted by her own mother. Over the months her and her boyfriend became addicted to heroin and attempted to extort me for money. I told them I was moving cross country I did the week. Before they left they set me up for an armed robbery. I was throwing my garbage out and someone kicked my door open. A guy kicked my door down with a shotgun and screamed, "What's in the bag? What is in the bag, nigga?" I said, "It's just garbage." He said, "I don't care." I said, "Why?" Nearly in tears. Not part of the revenge story, just thought it was funny. I was relieved of most my valuables and close to 10k. The couple themselves, from being sneaky and sin fraud and taking advantage of my good nature, took me for 40k to 70k in cash, back rent, back bills, and assorted other, including paying for her kid's birthday because she was a broke junkie. After all was said and done, I just called the cops. Cops connected them with several other crimes throughout the area. Both of them and the robber are facing from 7 to 55 years in jail, and she is never allowed to see her son again. Also I get a percentage of their money until probably forever, because I can't see them getting jobs that matter or pay well after being felons. Wish I could just get my money back in a lump sum, but them being caged for a majority of their lives and denied access to their kids is fine too. Back in summer of '02 I was at this AIDS festival in Paris, Solidays or something. Anyway, you know how lots of people and fairgrounds go. There was one of those porta potty areas with the rows of blue box toilets, a huge line, and about a 30-minute wait. So I waited in line. It was forever. I had to go really bad, but it's cool. Everybody's being polite, and we are moving along. There's just that many people. Then I'm 3 people from the front of the line. It's about to be my turn. Relief sounds too sweet for words at this point. Then some random guy walks past the dozens upon dozens of patient people in the line, walks up to a door that opens as someone steps out, and he enters. Didn't even wait at all. People notice, they sigh, call him names, but nobody does anything. I'm pissed. This is not going to simply get ignored. Justice must be served. I walk forward onto this ribbed aluminum stage that the porta potties are sitting on. There's a concrete block sitting there. I pick it up and wedge it in front of the door of the line cutter's blue box door and the ribbing of the stage. It's seen there good and tight. I went back to stand in line. The people in line are laughing. The door bangs. No one moves. The door begins to bang faster and harder. No one goes anywhere near it. I'm at the front of the line. It's my turn. I do my thing. The door is still banging. The toilet is foul and that used for hours by hundreds of people way. I'm happy to get out. The door is still banging. I walk off into the sunset, past dozens of people who are giggling about the angry porta potty that rattles in the distance. Too long. Didn't read some guy skips a 1/2 hour wait for a bathroom, gets trapped and must wait for rescue from the people he cut in front of. I can't believe I'm about to write this story. I've never told anyone. A few years ago, I found out that my boyfriend, who I have been with for a few years, was cheating on me and requesting nudes from other girls. When I confronted him about it, he broke down and begged me to forgive him. Like an idiot, I did, because I truly loved him. A week goes by, and I'm still hurt and angry. When I tried to talk to him about how I felt, he was quick to disregard everything I said and did not seem remorseful anymore. I thought I knew him, but obviously I was wrong. He has always been a sweet guy and I never would have thought he would do this behind my back. When we finally did talk about it, he tried to turn it around on me. I didn't understand, because I've always been faithful, and I did my best to make him happy. I'm also not just saying to make myself look like a better person than he is, but I was crazy in love with him. I've never been one to do things out of spite, but my anger clouded my better judgment and decisions. One night we both had a terrible fight. It escalated into a physical one. He slapped me, gave me the double bird, I'm not freaking kidding, and said he wasn't sorry anymore. Afterwards, I went to hang out with a close friend of mine. I was hysterical. I told my friend what happened between my boyfriend and I don't know how, but it led to amazing sex. I was on birth control, so I let him come inside me. I know, two wrongs never make a right and cheating is never okay, but I was just so angry. So later that night, I went back to my boyfriend's house. I know, stupid and dangerous. He apologized and tried to have sex with me. I was so disgusted by him, but I wanted him to eat my friend's cum from inside of me as revenge. He did unknowingly, and after I came, I stood up and said I was leaving him. Never seen him since. Not surprisingly though, he constantly blew up my phone for weeks before he finally got the message. Although it's the only relationship that I had to deal with these kind of problems, it's safe to say that it's a lot harder for me to trust anyone now. I guess you can't really know what kind of person someone really is. Too long. Didn't read. Boyfriend a few years cheated on me and hit me. Was not remorseful and tried to justify himself. Out of blind anger and rage, I made that friker eat another man's cum from my pussy. In 11th grade my friend sold pills that his family member didn't need. He did this for a couple years without any problems. One day somebody that's been buying from him asks if he can be fronted $60 worth of Vicodin. Doing it many times before he did it without worry. A week's comes up and he calls. Explains how he won't have the money this week, but if he fronts another 60 he'll pay back 150 once he gets paid. My friend agrees. He never pays, changes his phone number, deletes his MySpace, as childish as this sounds, in an attempt to not be found, despite us living in a relatively small town. About a year and a month pass, and he's frequenting the local disc golf course. So he goes there, and sees the person who told him about him showing up around the disc golf course. Starts talking with him, and he's selling him pills now. My friend asks him to set up a deal where he would meet the person who stole from him along his way to buy pills. Keep in mind this person was going to sell him $200 worth, and he said he had the money on him. About 15 minutes pass, and it's being set up. He walks to the other end of the course, so the fastest route for him would be to take a small path/trail. My friend and him meet, and he's scared and surprised. Asked him about the money, and he said he didn't have it. Then told him to give him his money or else he'd get beat up. He doesn't pay, gets beat up pretty bad. Then calls the cops and he goes to jail. Fast forward about 3 years. We are drinking at a bar 2 weeks ago, and as usual a few girls are talking to us, but more hitting on my friend. We think nothing of it, and we go outside, so he can smoke. While outside one those girls come outside, and asks for a smoke. She's pretty cute, and not as annoying without her friends. At this point I'm pretty wasted, because I don't drink much. My friend's talking to this chick and I decide to call it a night, before I can't walk home. Next day my buddy calls me at like 10 in the morning. This is odd, because I stayed out till about 2:30, and he went home with that chick. He tells me how he asks her, my place, or yours? And she says mine. They get to her place, and it's really dark. They stumble to her room, where intercourse took place. The next morning he goes to get some water, and sees some family pictures. Sees the person who ripped him off in a few pictures. He asks her who, if she has any brothers, and says yeah I have one, I think you guys went to school. Her brother was the person who ripped him off. Sorry about the too long, didn't read, hope it was worth it. Edit, fix typos. So, in high school, my group of friends consisted of myself, my cousin, Jake, and 3 other friends. This is about my cousin though. Jake became friends with a girl he went to school with named Emily. Emily, though, just happened to have a boyfriend, later fiancé, who had graduated a year earlier and joined the army. Because of this, he obviously wasn't around, meaning Jake had Emily all to himself. During this time, He had concocted a secret relationship he had with her he constantly made up stories about. It was pretty obviously fake, because he talked about things we damn well knew didn't or couldn't happen. But we let him continue on for a while, and the stories got more and more outlandish. Eventually, I got fed up with this, and decided, true or not, if he wanted these stories to be real so bad, my friends and I would show him what would happen if they were. So, my friends and I gained access to his MySpace one night, and as him, sent a long descriptive message about all the things that he had supposedly done with Emily to her fiancé. We knew that it sucked for this guy. But seeing as how towards the end of all this, Jake had Emily playing along with his lies to us, like they were actually together, we thought he should be aware of what was happening, or at least supposedly happening, in his absence. Well, after writing this message out, basically telling this guy that Emily was Jake's girl now, and that he should just back off, so that they could be together, we sent it, and waited for the chaos to ensue. The next morning, we got a panicked phone call from Jake about how 3 guys apparently related to the fiancé showed up to his house, threatening him to stay away from Emily. She also called, telling him she wanted nothing to do with him ever again. Afterwards she went on to graduate and moved to be with him. They are married, and I'm sure that both her and Jake know that it was me, Zach, and Corey that orchestrated the whole thing, but they can never really tell anyone that it was us without admitting that they either A, had a secret relationship, or B, made up a secret relationship to make Jake look cooler in front of us. So everyone played along, and no one outside the 5 of us knew what really happened. Since we don't talk to Jake, and he steers clear of us for a number of reasons. Last summer I started helping this guy with a huge project he wanted to pursue. He was a lobbyist for weed legislation or something like that, and after spitballing a few ideas he was set on bringing me into the project. I ended up spending countless hours putting together projected budgets, yearly plans and networking yields and yada yada yada. He is super impressed and tells me about this super private party in LA that he can get me into, on the condition that I get him some FaceTime with the host. I'm confident I can do it, having coached a nationally winning speech team, and decide sure, my 22 years here on earth have been a struggle. Maybe this is my chance at fate. I can't afford a plane ticket, and he can't pay for my travel, he says. This is where I should have drafted up contracts. I say okay, I'll drive out there. I have barely enough in savings to get there and back. Fast forward 1 week. I'm 2,000 miles into my journey with my dog, arriving in LA and freshening up at my cousin's place, and he calls me asking for a ride from the airport. He says he'll book us a hotel room. I pick him up from some small airport in southern LA. We finally find a hotel, and he springs for a presidential suite. I didn't care at this point. I just wanted to get him this meeting and get paid and launch this project that I had become very attached to. We arrive. He looks like he spent a few thousand on clothes, and I had spent over half my savings getting here. I work the Marrakesh house meeting and greeting, and he buries himself in a bottle and a huge blunt towards the end of the night. I'm talking with this interesting old fellow and the host joins us. The older man compliments me on my inertia, for lack of a better term ATM, and the host and I start chatting. Before long the host is completely absorbed in my grasp of my generation, and is dreaming right along with me. My founder is nowhere to be found. Sorry for this huge wall of text, but this has been on my chest for a while, and I can't sleep now. I've had a crazy night. Finally we are all in the host's private talk room. And, let it be known, I'm not good at asking for money. I was raised by a single mom, and have always been able to make the best and make do. So that's why my friend came. This is his forte, but he is so freaked up and enthralled with the one woman in the room. The host is looking at me like, "Kit, you've got it all wrong. I'll help you, but not this freak up." Party ends soon after. We receive no money. To my knowledge, I lost track of he who shall not be named a few too many times that night, and both fall asleep. The next day I wake up, and I'm taking care of my dog in the car, and watch his face keeps calling me about breakfast. Ends up he had a business meeting with one of his higher ups from Washington, another lobbyist, and needed me to spit some game. I got there too late. My partner freaked up and was cut out of Washington's loop for some seedy practices, and he decides to go home. Not answer any of my emails or calls about payment or compensation. He cuts me out. I move on. Fallen and out of love on my way back across America, expanding my life experiences tenfold with barely any money left in my billfold. I get back to the Midwest broke. I can't get a place for a while and anything in my price range won't allow dogs. Luckily my family stepped in and looked after my faithful companion. Fast forward a year plus. I'm standing outside of work on a smoke break and watch his face come strolling by with a Rolex and a year-old pit, clearly untrained. Word had gotten around how he kinda fricked me over, and he was clearly on the defensive. I smile at the dog, play it cool with him while I smoke, and ask if his dog likes bones. He said that would be great. I go inside and come back out with the biggest pork bone I can find. It's massive. I set it on the ground for his dog and put my cigarette out. Signal that my break is over. Time for us to part ways. Dutcher bag picks the bone away from his dog and tries telling it to sit. I smile as the dog just looks at the bone. I say goodbye completely satisfied as he then proceeds to walk around downtown with his pit bull running up his expensive pants biting at the bone that he holds high above. For the past 9 months I blamed that guy for much of my suffering. I blamed him for me not having my dog anymore. I blamed him for me starting all over. I blamed him for going around town and spreading lies and rumors about me because he tried to take my project and run with it and fell flat on his face. He did a ton of publicity and ended up pointing the finger at me. I just wanted to be compensated. Too long. Didn't read. Guy plays with my fate. A year later, I get his untrained dog a bone and let him be the bait. Satisfaction. I has it finally. Edited to add that I'm now a prominent chef at one of my city's best restaurants and thus had access to ossobuco bones, pork leg, going to pull a gun out and says a bunch of stuff about ending us or something and to come closer. Scared shitless and not sure what to do in the middle of a fight or flight moment I look at my friend and mumble some stuff to the people and start walking away quickly. Like I said before, it looked like they put a lot of energy into this car. It was lowered, had LED lights on the sides, some stuff written on the side, sounded like it had some air injector thing inside, and looked brand new. It peels out behind us. We are afraid they are going to turn around and come after us. So we run off the street to a dark spot just in case and turn around to see if we need to run like crazy. They gun it through a red light and take the turn at an incredible rate of speed. That's when I heard it, the loud pop. Smash, crack, smash and grind. I completely forgot about the big hunk of cement I left. I accidentally totaled these assholes' car. So we sprint off, obviously not waiting to see their reaction, trying to hold in the laughter long enough to get away. Finally getting home a few blocks later I laughed harder and longer than I ever have before and probably ever will. Never played organized sports, but that has got to be close to what winning the Super Bowl feels like. Sweet victory. I was playing intramural basketball in college, sophomore year. It was the fraternity league, so there was a bit more ego and pride at stake. Context: our fraternity was the only northern fraternity at our school, planted in the middle of deep south, backwoods city. We took pride in, simply put, not being a bunch of racist fricks, having the only multicultural house on campus, often hosting joint parties with the NPHC guys. Much fun. The Grudge. One night we were matched up to play one of our bigger rivals, the guys that dress up in Confederate soldier outfits and take pictures of each other toughing their muzzle loaders. Nuff said. Game is going well, we are winning, but it is pretty close. The game is starting to get dirty. I set a pick at the top of the key. It wasn't too sharp as the crossing guard ran a crossing route that gave away the surprise. The asshole kid comes bowling through anyways with his elbows up. I catch the tip of his elbow right in my sternum, knocking my backwards to the floor and completely out air. As soon as my breath comes back I knew something was wrong. Every breath sent surging pain through my ribs, front to back. I couldn't breathe in all the way. As soon as I tried to, my ribs would make a loud crack/pop noise. My sternum was cracked. I was done. It took forever to heal. Weeks of painful breaths, having to sleep on my back. Cracking pain every time I opened a heavy door or threw my book bag over my shoulder. 8 months later it was still cracking. I missed soccer and softball season and couldn't lift for even longer than that. Payback, senior year, Greek games, right before graduation. They host a Greek-wide tourney of 12 or so different sports/games. They do it the week of finals. Not the brightest idea in the world, but hey, it's Greek life. We are playing flag football and getting our ass handed to us by those rebel boys. We only had one sub and were pretty worn out by the end. I'm playing QB and the asshole Rib Cracker was playing corner. He was sticking to my best receiver the whole game, so on the snap I rolled to the left to his side. He finally bites and rushes me as my receiver runs post. I pretended to not see him, scanning the right side of the field to keep the safety from biting on my left post receiver. Too late, the safety picks up the route with the weak safety coming over for backup. Meanwhile old Cracker McElbow is still steaming full speed at me. I stopped rolling left and started shuffling back, as if I'm about to throw across to the right, facing. At first I was going to throw it, but something in my head said frick it. Maybe it was the losing score and the shittiest receiver on the team, screaming, waving his hands like freaking Tom Hanks in Castaway. I waited on that racist frick to get close enough to see the whites of his beady bigot eyes. I planted my back foot and got low, as if I was gone to toss a Hail Mary, coiling up like a rattler. As soon as he stretched forward, arms out like redneck Frankenstein, thinking he was going to snatch my flag, I dropped my shoulder and tucked the ball and exploded up into him shoulder first. It was perfect. The round of my left shoulder was firmly placed right in his solar plexus. I could feel a burst of hot air blow on my face as all of the wind came out of his chest. He stuck there on my shoulder like a bug on a windshield. As I leap forward, the sound of that hit still resonates in my ear, like a sledgehammer hitting a whoopee cushion, followed by the flopping noise of a limp body falling from a few feet in the air. I didn't stay around long to bask in the glory of this sweet revenge. I booked it, turning an ugly play into a 55-yard rush with a few sweet Barry Sanders crossovers, tripping up a few other bigots, before I got my flag pulled near the goal line. As soon as I caught my breath, I turned around to see the dickhead rolling around on the ground. I jogged back to check on him, disguised as a gentleman's gesture. The ref was standing above him hunched over repeating, "Take it easy kid, just breath, just breath." I asked him if he was okay. He just sat there making walrus noises as he gasped for breath. Somewhere in his oxygen deprived head, he got the idea to try and stand up and walk it off. I'm not sure if it was his pride or hubris, maybe just the fact that I was asking him if he was okay, like a parent to a toddler with skinned knees. As he stumbled to his feet, he started walking towards the bench, legs flopping forward like a newborn foal, though he stopped making elephant seal noises, but not as any means of progress. The ref was trying to grab him and hold him back, saying, "You need to sit, you need to lie down and breath." I think it was about this point that the lights went off upstairs. He took one more step past the ref, his knees oscillating like galloping Guddy, and his eyes rolled right to the back of his head, staring at his oxygen-deprived racist-ass frontal cortex. In that moment of consciousness, his knees locked up and he went limp at the waist, like Woody from Toy Story. Tom Hanks REF-2. He fell face first into that field, like an ostrich trying to bury his head in the sand. Everyone around just froze. No one said a word, but we were all thinking the same thing. That line from The Departed. He fell funny. There he is with his face firmly planted in the soil, his arms flopped out to the side, and his is in the air, like he's getting ready for some weird redneck fraternity gag. Clearly he was in need of some help, but no one wanted to touch him. He became a piece of art, something to gaze upon in wonder. The ref started blowing his whistle and screaming for a sports medic. She quickly runs over and stops a few feet from his lifeless statue-like body. Bent and Avicii probably stood there, motionless, for at least 5 seconds, having flashbacks from basic paramedics classes. Finally she bends down and grabs him by the waist and pushes him over. His face limp, mouth agape, blood coming from his nose and a cut on his cheek, and his lifeless eyes just staring up into the world. She checks his pulse and start talking to him like a deaf person. "Wake up, come on now, wake up." After a few seconds, his eyes roll back and his eyes squeeze shut, his limbs start flopping around again, and then he breathes. They slapped his ass on a stretcher and hauled him off the field, and we got back to losing the game. An ambulance showed up to finish the job. at the end of the game and apologized to the ref and assured him that I didn't try and hit him. He looked at me and said, "It looked like he ran into brick wall. That was one of the cleanest textbook hits I have seen. By the next day, talk of that hit was bouncing around Greek week. People talking about the dude that ostrich ed himself and went unconscious. I got to leave a memorable mark on a few days later, just before graduation. I saw him on campus. He looked up at me and quickly looked down and walked away. His face was jacked. 2 black eyes and a cut on his cheek, full raccoon face. Knowing he had to walk across stage at graduation looking like that, pretty sweet if you ask me. This one happened when I was about 14 years old. I was a big fan of Counter-Strike, and back then there were a lot of keygens that would let you make an account and play for free. Problem was, those keys they gave didn't work 99% of the time because everyone had already used them. Well, one day I got pretty lucky and managed to find a working one. I started playing passionately for the next week and told my friend's brother about it. He wanted to play too, so I generously gave him my password. What does he do? He changes it so he can play as much as he likes, as we could not be 2 on the same account online at the same time. This guy was usually pretty chill, but he was going through intense puberty, so he pulled some scumbag moves sometimes. This was when I began my mastermind plan to get my account back. Back then, I had discovered an exploit that allowed you to change the password of anyone on MSN who you had a lot of info on. If you knew where he lived and a few other stuff, you could have his password resetted and emailed to you in a day or 2, at most. So obviously I proceeded to do that with his email, and it all took a day and his MSN was mine. Now he knew that I was good with computers, so next time I was at his house, he asked me if I could help him get it back, which was exactly what I expected he would do. I said I would try to get it back, but that when I did, he would have to give me back my Steam account. He obliged. I waited a few days, gave him back his MSN. After he gave me back my account, he was very thankful. His brother knew of my plans, and we had a good laugh about it. It's only a few years later that we told him the story about how I masterminded him to give me back my account. We still laugh about it to this day. I took 5 years to graduate college because I was dual majoring, but I really only had friends in my year. For the 5th year I found a room in a house pretty close to campus. It was a little expensive, but I'd rather throw down a little more than have to drive and get a parking permit or take a bus. Think it was like $850 for one of the smaller rooms in the house. Welcome to college towns in California. The Indian guy who was running the house was paying $1,400 for the master suite, biggest room, own bathroom, walk-in closet, deck, and the other 2 bedrooms were going for $1,000 and $1,100 respectively. Anyway, the house was pretty nice. The carpet was trashed, and there were a few other small issues. It had a good sized backyard, but the barbecue island back there didn't work. One day when the landlord, a reckoned professor actually who owned a number of houses and rented them to students, was overdoing something, I joked something like for $4,300 a month you'd think you could get the barbecue working. The guy looks at me for a second and said the house was $3,300 a month, at least until he fixed it all up. Freaking his whole engine housemate, driving a new Mercedes SUV, was paying $400 a month for the master bedroom and making everyone else pay his rent. We were all working or taking out loans, while he'd bragged his dad was paying for everything and would always fly home every weekend. Anyway, he was a neurobiology major and wanted to go to med school. Had the grades for it, but it wasn't like a sure thing. Anyway, I made it my job to come home every day for lunch and to check the mail and all those med school letters that were coming back. They got burned. Last I heard he ended up at a vet school in the Caribbean somewhere. I was in a mosh pit at a show, probably like 5 or 6 guys, and this one little sheet kept elbowing me in the kidneys intentionally. I finally had it and literally threw him through 3 tables. 3 guys ran over to me and tried to rough me up, so I grabbed 2 by the collar, waiting for my friends to realize what was going on, and out of nowhere some sheethead throws a running punch directly at the bridge of my nose. Then he runs away. Turns out, since my head didn't move, my nose did. After 10 minutes trying to reduce it myself, we agreed to go to the When the doc put it back in place with this big metal stick, it sounded like a big branch snapping. I was also doped up so it just sounded awesome. Next day I'm at a show and bump into a friend. Tell him the story and he just laughs. Says I know who did it. This moron posted about it on Facebook. So I went into detective mode. Turns out the next night he was going to a show at this dingy basement pub. Called up my stuff guy's buddies and we devised a plan on the day if we show up around 8:30 p.m. Walk in. He's working the door. At this point I'm just laughing inside. He didn't recognize me. Pay him my cover. Go to the bar and the owner already knows something is up. 3 guys, 230 pounds, 280 pounds, and a 225 pound 6'5" kickboxer all clearly on edge. I order us around, turn my chair and stare directly at him. The bar is pretty quiet and there's some music playing in the background. Lights on. People are just chilling waiting. I wasn't sure if I should give him a chance to fight me like a man or just walk over and rock him. After 5 minutes staring at him, his friends finally caught on and all started whispering to him. He never looked at me. I said frick it, this kid is a complete coward. Fold up my glasses, walk over, and deliver the hardest punch I've ever thrown. It made a smack similar to the punch sounds you hear in Indiana Jones. His head flew back into the wall and knocked a cymbal off. There are cymbals hung all over the wall. I went into a blackout rage. He was KO, but as he doubled over I hit him again and woke him up. He started shrieking and crying, blood flowing from his face. I threw him over the table and into another one and jumped onto of him trying to break his hand. At this point he's crying and his girlfriend is straddling my back clawing at my neck. So I picked him up and threw him face first into a pillar and blood flew in a narc almost hitting my friend. I shrugged his girlfriend off and walked to the door, turned around, saluted the crowd and my friend yelled and that's what you get for sucker punching. We all ran out to the car and sped off into the twilight. He now stays as far from me as possible at any shows, even though I have no quarrel with him left and I'm even tempted to buy him a beer one of these days. The way he reacted when I sought my revenge was so satisfying, crying. He didn't even try to fight back. Little bit on the brutal side, but it's my best revenge story to date. Also don't piss off a rugby player in a mosh pit. We have giant smiles on because we love running into people. Senior year of high school my best friend had sex with my boyfriend. They lost their virginities to each other. She also bragged about it to everyone and told them that my boyfriend has always wanted her secretly and that he only even dated me to get closer to her. She actually tried to make a lot of things really hard for me. I was pissed, but too sad and confused to really do anything, and I couldn't even figure out how to get revenge. I ended up moving far away and going to college and she stayed there and went to community college. About 7 or so years later I returned to my hometown to visit family. One night I go to a bar and meet this guy and I figured out that it's her fiance and they were getting married in a month. So I fricked him and spent all the time I could with him over the few weeks I was there, never revealing myself. Then after about 3 weeks of doing my best to seduce him, a week before his wedding, he tells me that he has fallen for me quickly and can't imagine anything else he calls off the wedding. He tells his now ex-fiancée everything, and she is furious. I must also point out that this guy was considered to be loaded, and she was expecting a very easy life with him. I doubt she ever loved him from the stories he told me about her. Anyway, she shows up to my house drunk in her freaking wedding dress to come fight me. My mom, who has no idea what's going on, sees that she is unstable and tries to tell her I'm not home. But she doesn't buy it and knocks down my front door to find me in my kitchen. I look at her, the first time I'd seen her since high school, and laugh and tell her that revenge is a beach and now she knows how it feels. She collapses to the floor and starts bawling and howling about how I ruined her life and blah blah blah. My cousin eventually calmed her down and drove her home. I left to return to my job in my act feeling incredibly proud, smug, justified etc. But then about 5 months after it all happened I get a call from my cousin. Apparently after her wedding was called off, mostly because of my actions, she went through some really tough times and ended up going on this alcohol-infused painkiller bender. She basically odd and left herself very brain damaged and is now in a wheelchair, can barely speak or feed herself, and lives in a special home. I don't feel an ounce of sorrow whatsoever. I feel nothing to the point where it makes me question if I maybe be a sociopath or something. And if you're wondering about my boyfriend from high school, he has 4 kids by 3 women, works at a cell phone kiosk at our local mall, and had the audacity to try and hit on me once when I was visiting my family once. He also apparently has a 3-inch erect penis, but I never got to see it. Also, on a twisted note, me and her fiance have actually remained friends. Even though he knows exactly what I did, he doesn't really seem to care. He even comes to visit me from time to time, and we still sleep together. Too long. Didn't read. My best friend in high school had sex with my boyfriend, so years later I stole her fiance and basically drove her to nearly kill herself, leaving her brain damaged and in a wheelchair. I have no sympathy or remorse. Many years ago I lived in a building where in another unit lived a somewhat obnoxious alcoholic asshole whom I tolerated from time to time. Friends on some level, but nothing genuine. We partied and hung out from time to time, but when he spoke of others you saw into his dark side. He drank a lot and smoked weed, but never bought it or usually had any, but would enjoy smoking if someone else had some. He would be nice and somewhat generous in return, a bit of a mooch, but not the worst I've seen. He just wasn't a weed guy enough to buy it and be a regular smoker. He did smoke a lot of cigarettes however. Over time our friendship wore thinner, my tolerance for his bullshit, annoyingly loud pompous self-speeches, annoyingly insulting, never shutting up, looking to start shit/arguments then blow it off, because we're friends etc., was approaching 01 hot summer. He knocks on my door drunk as a skunk one hot summer night after midnight. He says he's been drinking since noon, and because I was on a later shift I wasn't around, and he hasn't had a smoke all day long. WAA. Poor him. He says he started on beer, but they ran out, and the last couple of hours have been drinking whiskey. Blech. And now his friends have left, and he knew I'd be home now, and decided to grab a joint off of me, knowing I'm such a nice guy, and usually had some from time to time back in the day. Now I happen to know, if I'm very drunk and haven't had anything to smoke and then have some when it's quite late it doesn't end well. This drunken asshole wasn't leaving until I gave him a joint, and I was not putting up with his nonsense. I wanted to send him on his way, and send him on his way I did. I rolled him a fat one from the strongest strain I had on hand. Fatter than I normally would have given had he shown up and asked for one straight in the middle of the day. The next day or perhaps the day after he asks me what was in the joint I gave him, he said it tasted great, but about halfway through it everything started spinning hard, and he was in the bathroom puking into the toilet with sweating headache head spins for the next 3 hours. I said dude you came here insisting I roll you a spliff, or you weren't leaving, so I gave you one. He said if he ever came up to my place again blackout drunk, to not give him any. At the time I knew I probably shouldn't have given him one knowing what would happen, but over the next year or two he crossed the line several times exploding whatever remained of our friendship. I regret nothing. A few years back I was refueling my car. I was inside paying when outside this huge black guy having a bad day bangs on the door of my car and tells my friend that he needs to move the car now because he's in a rush. My friend tells him he can't drive, and they won't reset the meter until I've paid anyway. This irritates him, but he accepts and goes back to his car. When I get back I'm told what had just happened. This takes about 2 minutes. All the time I'm watching him in my mirror glaring at me. I see his wife/girlfriend in the front and kids in the back. So I decide to wait a little longer and start playing with the radio. After another 2 minutes I couldn't take the daggers in the back of my head any longer, so I finally start my engine, and as I start to drive off I stuck my finger up at him. Probably a bit too much looking back at it now, I'll admit. Anyway, it must have really pissed him off, because he set off after me. I pull out on the road at 40 miles per hour and he did the same and drove right up behind me. Shortly down the road was the slip road to the motorway. At this point I was now in the middle lane of 3. The path was clear, so I left it until the last second. Trying to lose him, I swerved onto the slip road. He did the same, with kids in the car, but was too late, and ended up driving over the debris that builds up on the painted triangle hashed bit. He must have been going at 30 at this point. All I could see in my mirror as I drove onto the motorway was a few sparks from the front of his car as he ground to a stop. I always wonder how urgent his need for petrol actually was. It would have taken at least 30 minutes to change the tire, if that was the problem, and on top of that he still would have needed to fill up. Close bracket. I once worked in retail. We had an assistant manager who was bought in after the old one moved to another store. He was a younger getter who had successfully managed large shops before us, and was touted by the store, regional and area managers as being the person who could turn our ailing store's numbers around, or so everybody thought. I was a department manager, and after a few months of him being in the store we had a few issues with inventories being off. After some investigations these discrepancies were dismissed as being handling errors. A few months later, and things were more serious, I was weakly unable to find thousands of dollars worth of stock I had personally accounted for weeks before, and the entire wrath of the company's loss prevention teams came down on all the staff in the store. I and a number of other staff had to regularly answer questions about our movements in and out of the store, how we handled stock, what customers were given in bags. On average I handled 60 plus transactions and 120 plus customers in a 9-hour shift. The questions were brutal. The dock supervisor, who had been with the company for many years and was near retirement age, soon drew the ire of the inspectors, and he was questioned by police and had his life turned upside down by the company's loss prevention department. He started investigating the matter himself, started snooping around the other staff and quickly stumbled upon some interesting information on the assistant manager. A person with the same first name who looked nearly identical was prosecuted for embezzlement several years earlier in a different state. He started asking around amongst staff he trusted about the assistant manager, myself included. Things quickly started to unravel. We had a few odd stories of happenings involving the assistant manager, but nothing that said concretely that he was suspicious. Then, when one of the staff bumped into a former team member who had mysteriously just stopped turning up for work, she immediately stopped talking when mention of the missing stock and the assistant manager was raised. Eventually, after prompting from the dock manager, the loss prevention team interviewed the former employee, who it turns out had been threatened out of her job after she found out the assistant manager was trying to sell some of the missing stock to one of her friends. It was discovered he had a fraudulent identity and had stolen stock from the store over months and months of working there, but when it came to trial he never received a prison sentence because beyond what they had direct evidence of him stealing, they couldn't prove his involvement in stealing the other missing stock, even though everybody knew it was him, and it stopped when he was discovered. He was fined by the courts quite severely. He did not pay the fines and quickly disappears, assuming another name. Unfortunately, the dock manager resigned in anger at the company's treatment of him and his family. The company did not apologize to him, nor any of the other employees who were berated by loss prevention for weeks. Several staff ended up having to take medical leave because of stress-related problems during the investigations, and afterwards we all felt as though we had been cheated by a person we had trusted for months, and he had got out of any form of punishment other than losing his job. A few months later I received a frenetic call in the middle of a shift from another department manager who had the day off. She was at a toy store across town and had spotted the former assistant manager. After a few phone calls within our company, the loss prevention manager of our entire company, one of the largest retail chains in Australia, personally called the loss prevention manager of the toy store company and told the whole story. He was promptly fired, investigated and then prosecuted for the same offenses as he had committed with our company there, and I'm told received a jail sentence for it. Next time I saw the former dock manager I informed him what had happened. I think he must have grinned for the rest of the day. Too long, didn't read, dude pretended to be somebody he wasn't, stole from my work, caused a pile of stress and grief, and basically got away with it. A few months later some colleagues helped in getting him caught for the same crime, and he was made to pay his dues.